research around this client need. Am I going to do something here that makes sense or not make sense from an academic perspective? And then how do I build a good, robust solution to address that client need? And then, of course, in the 90s, you had the three-factor model come along. And then in the mid-90s, you had momentum come along. And in the 2000s, you had things like profitability and investment come along. So you had lots of different factors uncovered over time. But the way that we look on each one of those is they're models. They give us insights from the data. How do you use that to build robust portfolios? And I would say that's been kind of part of our heritage for 40 years. How do we build portfolios that can target these premiums, but be robust regardless of the market environment? And we've been through many different market crises with a broad range of investment strategies that have come out quite well the other side.
So let's talk a little bit about Gene Fama and Ken French's what started out as a three-factor model. It eventually became 5 and 7. Now there are hundreds of factors, many of which don't really add a whole lot of alpha or not consistent enough alpha to justify their complications and costs. Tell us a little bit about the Fama-French factor model.
Yeah, so, when you go to the 80s, there was a lot of empirical evidence being uncovered that the prevailing model from the 60s and the 70s, the capital asset pricing model, didn't explain the data very well. So when you looked at it was a beautiful model. It was very, intuitive, but it didn't explain the data all that well. And so Ken and Gene in the early 90s started to organize all the data to say, can we put some of these observations in one kind of unified viewpoint of the historical data? And from that, exercise came a better model in the sense that it could explain the returns that you saw among stocks far better than the capital asset pricing model. So explain more of the returns, more of the variation that you saw in the returns across stocks. And so subsequently came the three-factor model. Then to your point, lots of factors have been added. If you look at Fama-French's or even Ken's website now, you'll see a profitability factor, you'll see an investment factor, you'll see momentum factors, you'll see all different types of factors. And as I mentioned earlier, factors are really great to help you organize the historical data. But you don't want to get kind of too starry-eyed about the latest factor model. I kind of view a lot of the academic research over the past 30 years as doing variance on a theme. And so it's not that kind of brand new discovery, but it refines your understanding of existing factors. So there's probably 20 or 30 or 40 different value factors out there, but you don't need all 20 or 30 or 40 when you're managing a strategy, but you can get insights from the different factors on how to manage a strategy effectively. And so what I mean by that is, if you think about what data are available, you have security prices, you have data from income statements, so things like income or profits or revenues or expenses, and you have data from balance sheets, assets and liabilities. They're broadly the data that are available to go test. And when you look at all of those factor models, they're variance on a theme. They're either looking at current values of those variables, whether it's current income or current price-to-book ratios or price-to-earnings ratios, or they're looking at how they've changed. How have prices changed over the past number of months? How have assets grown over the past number of months? How has profitability changed over the past number of months? So there's 3 data sources, and people do 2 things with them. So there's actually really kind of 6 that you can think about that kind of encompass most of the hundreds of factors that you see out there. And I think that if you have coverage of those 6, current prices, current balance sheet items, current income statement items, and then how each one of those have changed in recent past, you have pretty broad coverage of all the various different factor literature that's available. And that's what we do at Dimensional.
Really, really interesting stuff. Coming up, we continue our conversation with Gerard O'Reilly, Chief Investment Officer and co-CEO of Dimensional Funds, discussing the $1 Trillion Club.
You're listening to Masters in Business with Barry Ritholtz on Bloomberg Radio. Market movers.
We talked with GM CEO and Chair Mary Barr.
Lawmakers.
Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida. Congressman Jim Clyburn, the House Majority Whip.
Medical experts.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you so much for being with us.
The people who shape the future. Speak to David Weston.
When it comes to energy, no one knows it better than Dan Yergin.
Bloomberg Balance of Power. Weekdays at noon Eastern.
Derek Johnson, he's president and CEO of the NAACP.
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
Put a frog in boiling water and it'll jump right out. But put a frog in cool water and slowly heat it up, that frog will boil. As veterans, we tell ourselves the lie that we can handle anything. We let the water boil. You are not a frog. If you or a veteran you know needs support, don't wait. Reach out. Find resources at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach. Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
When Seether, Papa Roach, and more lay waste to the stage at Welcome to Rockville 2022,
you'll hear it live on Sirius XM.
Are you ready?
jump into the pit at Hard Rock's biggest festival, featuring music, interviews, live performances, and more from this year's artists.
All this weekend.
Rockville Radio on Octane, Channel 37.
Schedule at SiriusXM.com/Rockville.
Let's plan on having concessions over there.
Mike is remodeling the old family drive-in movie theater.
Go find Gavin. Tell him the sound team is here.
He'll need a new front-of-house cast and behind-the-scenes crew.
Hey, can we talk staffing real quick? I'm thinking at least 6 per shift.
Indeed can help him hire great people fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. Our hiring platform instantly connects you with quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
You need to know how political, environmental, and market changes will affect you and your business.
Is inflation here? Is it not here? Is the Fed going to have to clamp down?
But you don't stop there.
President Biden says a lot of the inflation is driven by supply shortages.
Some tension also this morning between the U.S. and Europe.
You want a continuing flow of information and analysis 24 hours a day.
Is tapering a better word right now than transitory?
Has Brexit brought about a fundamental shift in the political landscape?
At Bloomberg on SiriusXM, we make sure you get it.
The story that has gripped Wall Street this week.
Deep insights from the people who make the rules.
We're joined by U.S. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh.
Jim Bullard, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis.
And the people who win by them.
Joining me right now, Robinhood CEO Vlad Tenev.
Jeffrey Rosenberg joining us with BlackRock.
Bloomberg on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
People have played into this story of the new cyber world.
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. You might compare Elon Musk to the dog who chased the car, Twitter, and caught it with his initial $44 billion offer for the social media platform.
The way Musk has handled this is a disaster. It's a black eye for Musk.
Wedbush analyst Dan Ives says it's one that could leave a lasting mark.
I think there's actually net negative impact, even in terms of for Tesla stock, just the way Musk has handled this.
Ives tells Bloomberg TV Musk's decision to pause the deal was based on one thing, and Ives does not think it's the number of bot accounts that Twitter has.
We continue to believe Musk got cold feet. It is more of a scapegoat issue.
He says New York City cabbies know Twitter has bot accounts, but he says Musk got a cold dose of reality by looking at his own accounts.
He underestimated, I think, the impact on Tesla stock.
Musk, Tesla's CEO, has seen Tesla's shares fall sharply since he announced the Twitter purchase. I'm Joan Doniger. This is Bloomberg on SiriusXM.
Harry's back home.
Mr. Beth.
Harry, going through our history together is like our 10-year anniversary.
Congrats to us.
And you're going to be in the middle of it all.
Grateful for the emotional generosity that I've been gifted by all the fans.
Harry Styles gets real and plays songs from Harry's house all weekend on Hits 1.
First in the pop category and anytime on the SXM app.
Included with all trials and popular plans.
I tend to second-guess dinners with friends because they're often interrupted by diarrhea, gas, bloating, stomach pain, or oily stools.
It turns out I have EPI, or exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, which means I'm missing the enzymes needed to digest food. My doctor prescribed Creon, pancrelipase, an oral prescription medication that replaces pancreatic digestive enzymes. Creon treats EPI due to cystic fibrosis, chronic pancreatitis, pancreatectomy, or other conditions.
Creon may increase your chance of fibrosing colonopathy, a rare bowel disorder. Tell your doctor if you have a history of intestinal blockage or scarring or thickening of your bowel wall, if you're allergic to pork, or if you have gout, kidney problems, or worsening of painful swollen joints. Call your doctor if you have any unusual or severe gastrointestinal symptoms or allergic reactions. Take Creon as directed by your doctor and always with food. Do not chew capsules, as this may cause mouth irritation. Other side effects may include blood sugar changes, gas, dizziness, sore throat, and cough. These are not all the side effects of Creon.
Creon is the #1 prescribed EPI treatment. Ask your doctor about Creon for EPI and visit Creon.com or call 800-633-9110 to learn more. That's CREON.com.
From New York, another update on Wall Street. In fact, records to London.
UK businesses are feeling the effects of higher prices.
To Hong Kong.
The Hang Seng down about 1.3% right now.
24/7 business and market news that expands your worldview.
Bruno Le Maire, always nice to see you, French Finance Minister.
I'm much more concerned about how things flow out of China.
Bloomberg on Sirius XM, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. In through the eyes of experts gives you a better view.
So let's talk about the pain trade.
And at Bloomberg, our market vision is 2020.
I am shocked by the moves that we're seeing in the rates market.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries, this is Bloomberg Radio on Sirius XM Channel 119. Now, a global news update.
The U.S. and South Korea plan to hold talks on restarting joint military drills in response to the North's nuclear program. President Biden and South Korean President Yoon announced the agreement at a news conference in Seoul. When asked by a reporter if he was willing to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Biden said it would depend on whether he's sincere. Monkeypox is spreading. The World Health Organization confirms 80 cases, with recent outbreaks reported in 11 countries. In the U.S., one possible case in New York and one in Massachusetts are being investigated. The CDC says monkeypox, which is a cousin of smallpox, can spread through airborne droplets and bodily fluids. Symptoms include fever, body aches, and rash. Authorities now say 2 people were killed and more than 40 others injured after a tornado touched down in northern Michigan. According to Michigan State Police, the twister first hit a mobile home park as it tore through the town of Gaylord, causing extensive damage. Governor Whitmer declared a state of emergency after arriving to meet with emergency officials in Gaylord last night. Thousands of homes in the area were without power. I'm Chris Coraggio.
And I'm Susanna Palmer in the Bloomberg newsroom. Amazon.com, stuck with too much warehouse capacity now that the surge in pandemic-era shopping has faded, is looking to sublet at least 10 million square feet of space or more. In addition to subleasing, we're now hearing Amazon could vacate even more space by ending leases with landlords. Our source says the excess capacity includes warehouses in New York, New Jersey, Southern California, and Atlanta. The company declined to say which space it plans to sublet or confirm the amount of space. Contact tracing is underway after that New York City resident tested positive for the virus that causes monkeypox. The unidentified patient continued to isolate, and health officials are treating the case as positive while awaiting final confirmation from the Centers for Disease Control. The state health department said late Friday that testing ruled out another case. The virus causes fever, body aches, chills, a rash, and fatigue in most patients. Representatives Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney are headed for an incumbent versus incumbent showdown. We get more about that from Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini.
This is after a New York court imposed new district lines, merging many of Nadler's constituents on the west side of Manhattan with many of Maloney's constituents on the east side. Now, if this map is allowed to stand, it will guarantee that one of the longest-serving Democrats with seniority and a chairmanship will be forced out of Congress, and that would be an extra setback for the party.
Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini. Australia has a new prime minister, 59-year-old Anthony Albanese, leading the Labour Party to its first victory in Australia since 2007. Albanese thanked his supporters Saturday night local time, noting outgoing Conservative leader Scott Morrison called to congratulate him.
Scott very graciously wished me well, and I thanked him for that, and I wish him well.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Susanna Palmer. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Barry Ritholtz. You're listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio. My extra special guest this week is Gerard O'Reilly. He is the co-chief executive officer and chief investment officer of Dimensional Fund Advisors. The 40-year-old firm has about 1,500 employees and manages about $650 billion in client assets. So let's talk a little bit about the growth of DFA and your role there. You're a bit younger than the typical member of your management team. How does that affect how you do your job? What do you bring to the table that some of the more senior managers might be missing?
So I've never really thought about it, to be perfectly honest. And maybe that's in part because I've always been on the younger side, whether it was in high school relative to the rest of the folks in my class. I went to college when I was 16, and so was a little younger than the other folks in my class. And then when I started working at Dimensional after doing a PhD, was younger than some of the other folks in the research team. So it's always been kind of the state of play, so I don't think about it too much. I would say at Dimensional, we have a very academic view of how to interact with each other. So interact with each other with respect, but challenge, and argue the facts and the issues, and the best ideas win. And so I think that when it comes to how to interact with colleagues, whether they're younger or they're older, it's exactly under that formula. You have to operate with respect, listen to the ideas, and then the best idea wins. Our view is don't defend the idea just because it's your idea. Embrace the best idea and the right idea, because ultimately, long term, that's going to be better for the clients. And if you make it better for the clients, you're going to have a better business. So, when it comes to business, clients first makes business very straightforward on how to make decisions and what decisions to make. And I think that atmosphere I've always enjoyed at Dimensional, and so therefore age has never been an important ingredient.
So, full disclosure, my firm is a client of Dimensional Funds. Ritholtz Wealth Management uses Dimensional Funds as one of our primary asset managers, along with Vanguard, BlackRock, etc. But Dimensional is definitely one of our larger fund providers. And I'm very aware of the process that Dimensional goes through in order to make sure that their clients understand the philosophy, understand the model, with an eye towards avoiding the sort of flavor of the month, hey, I'm chasing this hot manager, no, now I'm chasing that hot fund family. ETFs are very much a break from that prior embrace of working very closely with clients. Tell us a little bit about the internal discussions that must have taken place before you switch to ETFs, which, hey, anybody could go to their online trading account or Robinhood or whatever it is and buy the ETF. How have you managed around that?
So there was two big drivers of that decision. The first was input from clients. And as I mentioned earlier on, we work with financial professionals. So we don't work with the end retail consumer. We work with financial advisors like firms like yourself, who can get that level of understanding and knowledge and experience, so they understand what we're trying to accomplish. A lot of those firms were saying we're using ETFs more and more frequently on behalf of our clients, and we'd like to be able to use dimensional ETFs. Could you launch ETFs, please? And so we took that away. We thought a lot about it, and that was like kind of 2018 timeframe. And on the books with the SEC back then was a new proposed ETF rule. And what that rule effectively did was it made ETFs much more straightforward to bring to the market, much more straightforward for the end investor to evaluate, but then also clarified some things around the inner workings of ETFs that were important to us because we're not an index manager. We have a lot of the benefits of an index-based approach that include broad diversification, low turnover, low costs, but we have an active implementation. And so those rules got passed in 2019. The fourth quarter of 2019 is when the SEC adopted those rules, Rule 6C11 for anybody who's nerdy enough to want to look into them. And that was a bit of a game changer for us. We could do now what we had done in our mutual funds for decades in an ETF wrapper. So there was no give up on the investment proposition. As soon as that rule was passed, we went into full launch mode. By June of 2020, we had announced that we were going to launch. By November of 2020, so almost a year after the rule came out, we had launched. Those were the two big drivers. On the tax efficiency side, that wasn't as big a driver for us, largely because, and you're familiar with this, our mutual funds tend to be highly tax efficient. And we had tax-managed mutual funds that had similar tax efficiency ratios to ETFs. So we had very, very tax-efficient approach. ETFs take it up a little bit, our ETFs do. But it was more what our clients were asking for, and the rules changed such that we could deliver a investment proposition that was on par with our mutual fund investment proposition.
Really interesting. Coming up, we continue our conversation with Gerard O'Reilly, Dimensional Fund's Chief Investment Officer and co-CEO, discussing the state of today's markets.
You're listening to Masters in Business with Barry Ritholtz on Bloomberg Radio.
Experience the boom and the bliss of North America's largest electronic music festival. EDC Las Vegas, live on Sirius XM. Spend the weekend under the electric sky with performances from Tiesto, Illenium, Shaq, aka DJ Diesel, and more. On now through the weekend on Diplo's Revolution, Channel 52.
If you own a business, you know that to your customers, there's really no wrong time to call. 4 a.m. on a Saturday?
Hello?
Your daughter's first piano recital?
Sorry, everybody. So sorry, honey.
Surely not while you're re-roofing a 7th floor dormer.
Hello?
You can't always be on for your customers, but we can. We're Ruby, the team of virtual receptionists who answers all your calls and chats live, anytime, day or night, and always with the same great service. Just like an in-house receptionist, only better because we turn every interaction into a relationship. Experience Ruby for yourself. Visit Ruby.com, or better yet, call us 866-GET-RUBY.
With the Bloomberg Small Business Report, I'm John Tucker, brought to you by Dell. Averting the worst-case climate scenarios will likely require not just reducing emissions, but also removing huge quantities of existing carbon from the atmosphere. Carbon removal is costly, inefficient, and difficult to scale. Yet new technologies provide reason for hope, and the answers may come from small firms. Startups are pitching intriguing new ideas. Climeworks wants to trap carbon in a specialized filter, mix it with water, and pump it safely underground. Verdox Incorporated hopes to capture emissions using an inventive electrochemical process. Meanwhile, Heirloom Carbon Technologies is planning to heat up carbonate materials to accelerate their natural absorption of carbon dioxide. Others hope to use kelp, bio-oil, advanced reforestation techniques, and more. And that's the Bloomberg Small Business Report. I'm John Tucker on Sirius XM.
Come together for the 5th anniversary of the Beatles channel on Sirius XM.
As we celebrate with fan takeovers.
Tomorrow Never Knows is everything I love about the Beatles.
My favorite is All My Lovin'. Exclusive guest DJs.
This is Jimmy Fallon. I played it all weekend and just kept screaming every single song.
Plus fantasy concerts.
Countdowns.
Encores of interviews with Paul and Ringo.
And more.
This is Paul McCartney. I want to get on record. I love the Beatles channel.
Sirius XM 18 and the SXM app.
Only one sale away from the Shopify 1000 Club.
Is that a thing?
Wow, Mom. Have a cookie.
I'll take one.
Dad.
These are delicious. You need to sell them.
You should. Mom. No, seriously. Let's set you up on Shopify. It's easy.
I always knew you would build your own business.
Guys.
Yum.
Okay, if Mom can do it, then why not? Number 1000.
Start selling today with Shopify for free. Sell online, in person, and anywhere else your future holds. And manage it all from a single place. No design or coding experience necessary. It's why every minute of every day, something amazing happens. A new seller makes their first sale with Shopify. Plus, with on-demand business courses and 24/7 support, Shopify is with you every step of the way. So, when you're ready to bring your idea to life, build it on Shopify, the commerce platform powering millions of ideas around the world. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a free 14-day trial at shopify.com/XM. Go to shopify.com/XM right now and start selling today. Shopify.com/XM.
You know that famous line, if you build it, they will come?
This is the big headline that's catching investors' attention.
We did the opposite.
The European equity space now reacting very much to that negativity on Wall Street.
Technology shares were the biggest losers.
We built a financial business news source with experts who ask the questions you want answered.
If I want to de-risk my portfolio, how do I do that?
Should there be a vaccine mandate for domestic airline passengers?
What other points were the liberal justices trying to bring out?
And interviews with the people who move markets.
Welcome now Dr. Paul Romer. He's professor of economics at the NYU Stern School.
Brian Deese, the White House director of the National Economic Council.
Jian Cheng is chief China economist at Barclays.
But we built it so you can go anywhere, anytime.
So what has the market reaction been so far to this news?
Bloomberg on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
This could be pretty crucial.
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
You.
Seen through the eyes of experts gives you a better view.
So let's talk about the pain trade.
And at Bloomberg, our market vision is 2020.
I am shocked by the moves that we're seeing in the rates market.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries, this is Bloomberg Radio on SiriusXM Channel 119. Now, a global news update.
The U.S. and South Korea plan to hold talks on restarting joint military drills in response to the North's nuclear program. President Biden and South Korean President Yoon announced the agreement at a news conference in Seoul. When asked by a reporter if he was willing to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Biden said it would depend on whether he's sincere. Monkeypox is spreading. The World Health Organization confirms 80 cases, with recent outbreaks reported in 11 countries. In the U.S., one possible case in New York and one in Massachusetts are being investigated. The CDC says monkeypox, which is a cousin of smallpox, can spread through airborne droplets and bodily fluids. Symptoms include fever, body aches, and rash. Authorities now say 2 people were killed and more than 40 others injured after a tornado touched down in northern Michigan. According to Michigan State Police, the twister first hit a mobile home park as it tore through the town of Gaylord, causing extensive damage. Governor Whitmer declared a state of emergency after arriving to meet with emergency officials in Gaylord last night. Thousands of homes in the area were without power. I'm Chris Coraggio.
I'm Barry Ritholtz. You're listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio. My extra special guest today is Gerard O'Reilly. He is the co-CEO and CIO of Dimensional Funds, running about $650 billion. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the market this year. Pretty tough start. First quarter was a bit shaky. It was a little carryover from the end of 2021. So growth investors have been doing so well for so long. Hasn't been a great couple of quarters for them. How is DFA navigating this volatility?
Yeah, you're right. It has been a rocky start to the year in absolute terms. And when you look at the first quarter of 2022, a lot of the major indices, whether that's U.S. or non-U.S. developed or emerging, are in the negative territory. You're right. Value has continued on its good run, and value has been having almost like a 2-year a good relative performance, which is more what we expect from the world, and that continued on in the first quarter for sure, where value stocks outperformed growth stocks by as much as 10 percentage points in lots of different regions around the world. So that's been good for the investors in dimensional strategies, because a lot of our strategies on the equity side overweight value stocks and stocks with high profitability and so on. In terms of navigating the volatility, you know, when you go back to our investment principles, there's probably 3 that I would highlight. One, systematic approach is a good approach for investors with the right support, the right continued innovation, and the right price point. So that's one basic principle. The other 2 are that prices are predictions of the future. Market prices are forward-looking. How do you use those prices to manage risk and increase expected returns? And the third is that optionality has value. We should capture it on behalf of our clients. So when you go through a time period like what we've just been through, where you have Russia invading Ukraine, all the sanctions that then subsequently came on Russian companies, Russian stocks, Russian individuals, that flexibility or optionality is critical. Because what we were able to do was in January when, there was a lot of talk of sanctions versus various different companies and individuals. That we were able to freeze purchases on all Russian securities, which was an important part of our process. We said, okay, let's take a wait-and-see approach. And that was in part because if you go back to 2014, when the annexation of the Crimea by Russia, at that point, we have a set of criteria that we go through: rule of law, how are foreigners treated versus locals, the local infrastructure. And we said, you know what, that criteria for that country right now is not quite being perfectly well met. So we reduced Russia to a half weight in 2014. So we already had that flexibility built in. But that's very helpful when you go through time periods like this. Because you have a systematic approach that's largely rules-based, but you can't come with a set of rules that will contemplate every state of the world. So you need to have people who have pragmatic and practical experience to say, well, what can we actually implement in the real world? And then how does that sit as an overlay on top of what we do? So I think that this year that has been helpful in our strategies, and how do we stay flexible to adapt to what's going on in the world and in markets around the world.
So let's talk a little bit more about the value versus growth relative performance. Growth has really had a great decade. The 2010s, growth was beating value. That started to change last year. What do you attribute that to? Is it inflation, the end of quantitative easing and zero interest rate policy, or something else? And I'm sure the investors who are listening are going to want to know, and how long can this last?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I'm going to flip it around on you, Barry, which is, why did we have such a long run of growth outperforming value over the 2010s? Because that's the unexpected outcome. Value outperforming growth is not the unexpected outcome. Because when you think about value stocks, they're stocks that have lower prices and higher expected cash flows. So by definition, investors have applied a higher discount rate to them, and that's every day, and so you expect them to outperform growth stocks. When growth outperforms, that's the unexpected outcome. And that happens plenty because returns over the short pull are driven by the unexpected things that happen, not the expected. When you look over the past decade, there was probably unexpectedly good outcomes for the Facebooks and the Amazons and the Netflix. If you go back, 15 years and say, do you expect this group of FANG stocks or whoever to have an annualized compound rate of return of 30% a year for the next decade? Not many people would have said yes, but they did very, very well. They improved their earnings profile quite dramatically over that period and were rewarded. When you go then into the later time period, those value stocks, in particular in the US, when you look at the price to earnings or price to book ratios of value stocks versus growth, those ratios and those differences had grown dramatically large. So growth had become higher in terms of their valuations, whereas value had stayed kind of right around where it was, because value had come in kind of like its long-term average, but growth had come in well ahead of its long-term average in terms of returns. And so value was still in the same position to deliver those good returns going forward, whereas the expected returns on growth stocks had probably dropped given those higher valuations.
So let me phrase my hindsight bias in the form of a question, which is, isn't it obvious today that post-financial crisis, the financials would lag for quite a while, and they tend to be big value stocks? And then when we look at the growth side, hey, this was a societal transformation, a generational shift towards mobile, towards internet, towards technology. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, how did we not see? Why was this a surprise? It's perfectly obvious after the fact that this massive change was taking place.
It's obvious after the fact, but in the middle of it, you never know exactly what's going to happen because there's always new technologies. People often talk about the new normal, and there is no new normal because technologies have been developed persistently, decade by decade, for the past 100 years. And those technologies give rise to uncertainty about who will adapt and use them in the best manner, and who will be the winners and who will be the users once that new technology comes into place. So there's always a massive amount of uncertainty. It existed a decade ago and it exists today. And what we look to markets to do is process that information to say, given that uncertainty, who am I going to demand a higher return to hold or a lower return to hold? So I think that's the state of the world. But even things, Barry, like who was going to predict that COVID would come along and be such a boon to the Amazons and the Netflix of the world, because everybody was locked in their house for some period of time. That is unexpected. That's an unexpectedly good outcome, not for society, but for the firms that were well positioned to meet the needs of society when that unexpected event began to unfold.
So let's talk about a couple of things that are in the midst of changing and what you guys are doing about it. And I guess I have to start with volatility. We saw a giant spike in 08-09 during the financial crisis, another big spike in 2020 during the pandemic, and the VIX, the measure of volatility, was high 30s in just a month or so ago. That seems to be rolling over and coming back down. First, what have we learned about volatility and how can investors use it to their advantage? And second, what do you think this softening of volatility today might imply for the rest, at least of this calendar year?
So what we've learned over time about volatility is that when there's a market crisis, and this goes without saying, volatility increases. Why? Because uncertainty increases. There's a lot more uncertainty about what the range of outcomes may be, and that uncertainty leads to a few different things. Increases in the volume of stocks and bonds that are traded, increases in bid-offer spread, so the cost to trade those stocks and bonds, increases in volatility. All of those things come in a crisis. And we had a crisis in March of 2020 when Russia invaded Ukraine. We had another crisis. How would that translate into global markets? And volatility tends to spike. What we've also learned over time is that spikes in volatility are unpredictable. So it's a shock. It's unexpected for a reason, because it's unpredictable. And then once it spikes, it tends to decay slowly unless there's another big shock that comes along to spike it back up. So it tends to decay over a course of 3 to 6 months, goes back down to normal levels. And you can actually see that from market prices. There's different market prices that tell you about the implied volatility of markets over the next 30 days, over the next 30 days following that, the 30 days following that, and so on and so forth. And what you see from market prices is that when you get a big spike, from market prices, it's expected to decline over the next subsequent months. And we saw that clearly in March 2020. Volatility spiked, but the markets told you that it expects to decline over the next few months. It's the same with inflation right now. You can look at break-even inflation, and it's expected to be about 6% as of the end of Q1 2022. But if you look at over 5 years, it's expected to be 6% over the next 12 months and then decline to something sub-3 in the subsequent 4 years, right? So markets always tell you something about what's expected right now and what's expected in the future.
Really, really interesting stuff. We have been speaking with Gerard O'Reilly. He is the CIO and co-CEO of Dimensional Funds. If you enjoy this conversation, well, be sure and check out any of our 400 or so previous interviews. You can find those at iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We love your comments, feedback, and suggestions. Write to us at mibpodcast@bloomberg.net. You can sign up for my daily reads at ritholtz.com. Follow me on Twitter at ritholtz. I would be remiss if I did not thank our crack staff that helps put these conversations together each week. Mohammed Rimawi is my audio engineer. Atika Valbrun is my product manager. Paris Wald is my producer. Sean Russo is my head of research. I'm Barry Ritholtz. You've been listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio.
Here's what's happening on Sirius XM Sports.
Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics are hosting Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat for Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Will Boston build on the momentum from their Game 2 win, or will Miami bounce back? Sirius XM NBA Radio has the play-by-play action right now on Channel 86 and the SXM app.
Sirius XM Sports, wherever you are, your team plays here.
From New York to San Francisco.
California's turning up the heat on people who are refusing to be vaccinated.
From Los Angeles to Washington, D.C.
Muriel Bowser, the mayor of the District of Columbia. Madam Mayor, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
Wherever business takes you, you need a dependable source of information.
This week, it's a busy one for economic data.
We've been watching headlines roll across the terminal about the chip shortage.
And perspective.
Where are we in the cycle? How much more room do we have to continue accelerating?
From coast to coast. That is what Bloomberg on SiriusXM brings you.
There's a real cyclical story at play here for some of these big tech heavyweights too.
Invaluable news and insight, powered by 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
The UK is emerging from the biggest crisis since World War II.
Bloomberg on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
President Biden is once again issuing executive orders.
Bloomberg, the world is listening. When you have an important decision to make, first, line up your facts.
The rally continues this morning.
Bloomberg Daybreak at 5 a.m. Eastern.
We continue to watch the wild swings in markets.
We're seeing massive moves in nearly all asset classes.
Fresh tensions between the U.S. and China.
Bloomberg Surveillance at 7.
The issue that investors have right now is who's running the central bank.
This is what people are looking at, not necessarily what the Fed will do, but what they'll be forced to do down the line.
The movable feast here, folks, is the market reaction.
Bloomberg Markets at 10 Eastern.
Are you concerned at all that we may hit a fiscal cliff?
Manufacturing, middle America, the industrial has really come through.
And Balance of Power at noon.
That's Larry Culp. He's the GE chairman and CEO.
With over 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
There is this wall of cash that's going to continue pushing asset prices higher.
Bloomberg on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
We're seeing a lot of employers around the country now requiring vaccines.
Bloomberg, the world is listening. Live from the financial capital of the world, this is Bloomberg Radio on SiriusXM Channel 119. Now, a global news update.
The city of Buffalo held a moment of silence this afternoon to honor the victims in the Tops Market shooting a week ago. The 123-second moment of silence was broken by the bells of houses of worship, which rang 13 times to honor the victims. 10 of those died in last Saturday's shooting. The teenage gunman remains jailed on murder charges and what officials called a racially motivated hate crime. The first major load of baby formula from Europe could hit store shelves in the U.S. early next week. The first shipment for Operation Fly Formula is set to arrive in Indiana this weekend after 132 pallets of Nestle infant formula was loaded on a cargo aircraft at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The U.S. is sending $40 billion in security and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. The White House says President Biden signed the legislation while on his trip to Asia. It provides economic and military assistance along with humanitarian aid for the country as it battles the ongoing Russian invasion. Administration officials believe the $40 billion will be enough to keep Ukraine afloat through the current fiscal year.
Early voting, reaching for the wire. Epicenter closing on the inside. Early voting, Epicenter. Early voting comes inside and wins it. He wins the Preakness by a length and a half.
Yes, early voting is the winner of the 147th Preakness Stakes. The horse had the second best odds to win. Fan favorite Epicenter came in second, while Creative Minister came in third. Temperatures in Baltimore were about 90 degrees, making it one of the hottest races in Preakness history. Tiger Woods has withdrawn from the PGA Championship after making the cut in just his second tournament back from a severe leg injury in February of last year. Woods shot a 9 over 79 on Saturday, one of the worst rounds of his career. He was noticeably limping around the course with the cold and rainy weather making things especially difficult for him. It's the first time Woods has withdrawn from a major tournament as a professional. Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals in Boston tonight. The Heat led by as many as 26 points in the first half and withstood a Celtic comeback in the second half to win the final 109-103 to take a 2-1 lead in this series. Game 4 will be Monday. I'm Chris Coraggio. The investment banking firm J.P. Morgan suggests we could see a $6 a gallon gas across the country as early as this summer. Economist Ray Perriman says that would have wide ripple effects on the economy as families cut back.
Anything that's not a necessity, all types of consumer spending that you could regard as sort of luxury spending or spending that could be postponed.
This would usually hit the travel budget the hardest, but after COVID, he says nothing is stopping families from planning a vacation this year. Back in March, President Biden announced the release of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That hasn't helped the price at the pump, which has now topped over $4 a gallon in all 50 states. Streaming giant Hulu is looking to bring in new and former subscribers with a special deal. From now until May 27th, new and eligible returning subscribers can sign up for Hulu's ad-supported tier for only $1 per month for 3 months. The offer is in celebration of National Streaming Day. The push for new subscribers comes after the Disney-owned platform reported a gain of just 300,000 subscriptions last quarter. Other services are also struggling, as Netflix reported losing 200,000 subscribers in quarter one. The Johnny Depp defamation trial is on break until Monday. Rebecca Hughes reports.
Testimony wrapped up for the week Thursday, with jurors hearing from several witnesses about Depp's character and his use of drugs and alcohol. The Pirates of the Caribbean star is suing ex-wife Amber Heard, saying her claims of domestic violence have hurt his career. She is countersuing. I'm Rebecca Hughes.
A new Travis Scott Nike sneaker is drawing major interest. The rap star released 2 different colorways of the Air Trainer 1, continuing a list of collaborations with Nike. The raffle for the sneaker had over 1 million people sign up in just 30 minutes. It marked the first release by Travis and Nike since the Astroworld tragedy back in November. And in music history news, back on this date in 1977, Climax Blues Band's Couldn't Get It Right peaked at number 3 on the pop singles chart. I'm Chris Coraggio.
And now this Bloomberg Sports Update. 3 rounds complete PGA Championship. Mito Pereira, a 3-shot advantage on Will Zalatoris and Matt Fitzpatrick at 9 under. Meanwhile, for Tiger Woods, a really rough day. A 9 over 79 left him at plus 12 for the tournament. He is withdrawn due to leg pain. Mets and Rockies split a doubleheader in Colorado. Game 1 went to the Mets 5-1. Carlos Carrasco led just a run over 5 1/3. Starling Marte went deep. Then the Rockies thumped the Mets 11-3 in the nightcap. Yankees took out the White Sox 7-5. DJ LeMahieu a grand slam. Nestor Cortez Jr. 5 innings for the win. While Clay Holmes got the last 4 outs. He's up to 21 straight scoreless innings, possibly taking over the closer's role.
Probably as good a reliever as there's been in the league, I would think, to this point. I can't imagine it being any better. And, to come in, obviously they're in a big spot. I wanted to face in the top of their order with all those righties coming up.
There was also an incident with Josh Donaldson and Tim Anderson in this one. Donaldson calling Anderson Jackie, referring to Jackie Robinson. Anderson called himself that in an article in 2019. However, Anderson didn't take too kindly to it, calling it a racist remark. The league is now looking into the matter. Rangers, their backs firmly up against the wall. They're down 2-0 to the Hurricanes as the scene shifts to the Garden for Game 3 on Sunday afternoon. Despite being down, though, head coach Gerard Gallant remains positive.
We come into this building earlier in the season twice and we got dominated, 50 shots, I think. We come in here, we played good defensive hockey, battled hard. We only got 1 goal. That's the disappointing part of it. But, we played a good hockey team. We played good hockey and, fell short a little bit. So what do? You get ready for the 2 home games now coming up.
Preakness Stakes went to early voting, going off at 5-1. Epicenter, Creative Minister, rounded out the top 3. As for Kentucky Derby winner Rich Strike, did not run in the race, a planned rest as they get the horse ready for the Belmont Stakes. Eastern Conference Finals, the Heat took out the Celtics 109-103, take a 2-1 series lead, and the Avalanche, too much for the Blues 5-2. They're up 2-1 in that series. And that's your Bloomberg Sports Update. I'm Mark Bennett.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
The new tools that a metaverse can bring allows you to create more immersive content.
Companies are beginning to sell less oil, more electrons.
In-depth research and data on 2,000 companies and 130 industries.
The supply chain breakdown is combining with labor shortages. Will Eastern manufacturers continue to dominate, or will there be a renewed interest in Western manufacturing?
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Over the next hour, we are going to dig inside the big business stories impacting Wall Street and the global markets.
Each and every week, we provide in-depth research and data on some of the 2,000 companies and 130 industries our analysts cover worldwide.
Today, we're going to take a look at how inflation is hammering expectations for the S&P as margin pressures build.
Plus, convenience store M&A is poised to stay busy well into 2023.
And I'm Alex Steele, and I'm coming back. After 15-plus weeks at home dealing with COVID recovery, I am finally here.
Nice. Good to have you.
It is great to be back. A little bit of backstory. I got COVID at the end of January, and I've been dealing with brain fog and fatigue ever since then, and I'm back, but I still am struggling with it, and I'm still recovering with it, and it has been an incredibly difficult, horrible road upwards. So on that point, I wanted to bring in Sam Fazeli. He is a Bloomberg Intelligence Director of Pharma Industry Research, and he's kind of the guy who knew all this before, so we felt like the kind of guy we'd want to talk to when I came back. Sam, welcome.
Thank you very much, Alex, and Paul for having me on. And Alex, I have to say it's really, really nice to hear your voice again.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I feel like it took a small village to get me back here. You know, there are obviously a lot of people who got COVID and were seriously ill and have serious ramifications, right? But there are a lot of millions of people like me who have some kind of issue, whether it's, myocarditis or blood clots or memory loss or brain fog or fatigue that are really debilitating, but yet you're not in the hospital and you can still somewhat function. And I just wonder, have we seen any research on that? What do you know about all of this?
Yeah, it's a very, very complex situation, partly because it's only just being looked at in depth in terms of the biology of what's going on, partly because it's difficult to define, because as you rightly say, there's myocarditis, blood clots, brain fog, fatigue, and not everybody has all those symptoms. But when we're getting there, there are some pretty good recent research that highlights some of the factors that seem to be predisposing to this, and maybe over time we can try and deal with it.
That's it's interesting, Sam. We talk about, how wonderful the vaccines were for so many people in the world, but this long COVID is an issue that I'm guessing it's not going to be limited. It's going to be fairly broad, and it should be attracting some research. Are any companies kind of looking at it? Because the current therapeutics don't seem to be able to address it.
I really don't think there are therapeutics that are specifically being worked on for this disease. At least not that the companies are talking about. What you first need to do, Paul, is to try and understand the disease and why this carries on. And there was a really good, there are some journals that in the science world that people would I don't know if this is the right phrase to say on radio or not, sell their first child, perhaps, to get a publication in. And one of them is called Cell. And so there was a very nice paper in Cell that did actually do a pretty deep dive into what are the kind of characteristics of people who end up getting long COVID of some shape or form. So type 2 diabetes obviously was one of them. Mm-hmm. And then the other one was if you get virus in your blood. Because you remember, SARS-CoV-2 is a respiratory virus, right? So if you end up with virus somehow accessing your blood, there seems to be a connection. And then, very interestingly, activation of other viruses like Epstein-Barr virus. Mm-hmm. These are things that we generally tend to carry around with us. And it looks like that you can get reactivation of these for whatever reason, and that's what they're trying to understand, which then go on to give you all these other issues that you're dealing with.
What is the state right now of COVID? I've been in a little bubble, right? When I left, Omicron was up and running, and I come back and I feel like a different version of Omicron is up and running.
Yeah. I mean, but if Paul had his way, there'd be no virus anywhere. That's right. And I would love to have that. But unfortunately, they've coexisted with humans, bacteria and viruses and fungi and all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff forever. And not just humans, with animals. So we're going to have to deal with these as time goes on. And luckily, we've managed to deal with them a lot, very well. Where we are today is that we're seeing these new subvariants of Omicron. Some people think that they should be called variants of concern of their own, given a name of their own. But in reality, they are subvariants. And actually, Omicron is all these variants are all variations of the theme of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So today we have in New York BA2 spot 1-2 spot 2, or is it spot 1? I can't remember now. And that's basically then spreading everywhere else. Then you got BA4 and 5. And we wrote about this a few weeks ago, saying that these have got characteristics that may give them an opportunity over what we already had in Omicron. So that's what's exactly happening. They're spreading. And people who had the original Omicron seem to have a slightly more susceptibility to catching these subvariants, because then there's yet other mutations.
Sam, because of my age, I was able to get the second booster. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's my view, and then there's a survey we did, as you know. My view is that you probably have the best protection that you could have had after the third shot. And then what you get with these further shots is you get a little boost in, well, maybe a large boost in antibodies that gives you protection for a little while, and then that wanes or contracts, and then you're exposed again. Whereas your deep immunity, your T cells, your memory B cells, etc., are all lined up to defend you against severe disease in most cases, right? Again, not black and white.
Thank you all for letting me talk my book, and it was really good to talk to you, Sam. Also, great to get your perspective. Sam Fazeli, Bloomberg Intelligence analyst.
Coming up on the program, how inflation pressures are impacting the S&P 500.
You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence on Bloomberg Radio, providing in-depth research and data on 2,000 companies and 130 industries. You can access Bloomberg Intelligence through BI Go on the terminal. I'm Alex Steele.
And I'm Paul Sweeney. It's 13 minutes past the hour, and this is Bloomberg.
SiriusXM is the home to the best in podcasts, including Slow Burn, the story of Tupac Shakur and Notorious B.I.G.
As a Black Panther baby, Tupac had every bit of street bona fide that he would ever need.
Biggie's brilliant. He was someone who just like, I'm lyrically superior and I'll take your girl.
Slow Burn.
We'll take you back to the 90s, the creative lives and the tragic deaths of Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G.
Available now on the SXM app, included with all of our trials and popular plans.
There's more to financial, political, and world health news than what's happening right this second.
Europe is trying to tackle COVID outbreaks by streamlining quarantine rules.
Although right this second is important.
We've got a few stocks of interest on the move.
Context and history tell you even more of the story.
This is something that we know we're going to have to be living with for years, and it's a question of treatment, it's a question of getting more and more people vaccinated.
So Bloomberg has journalists and analysts working in real time.
The markets rallied pretty sharply.
Is this a trend that has more steam? Could we see 2% negative real yields?
And we follow stories that unfold over time.
Lawmakers in the House today dropped 5 bills.
I really don't know where to start this morning other than all the experts have been wrong.
All over the world.
Global shares are grinding closer and closer to all-time highs.
Bloomberg on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
Investors always knew that Chinese investments came with some political risk.
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Berg Money Minute. A growing industry is making a splash. Last year, car wash purchases topped $13 billion, an all-time high for the industry. Eric Wolf, CEO of the International Car Wash Association, compares 2021 to the year prior.
In the retail segment, we're seeing growth of about 20% top line. On the supplier side, we're seeing growth closer to 30%.
He says subscription plans have been a game changer, while other owners go the extra mile.
It might include coffee or other fun things, having the option of folks to have the ability to buy a bite to eat. I've seen a car wash with a disco on top of it in the evening that converted to a nightclub.
And there's more to come.
We've seen private equity and platforms really emerge in the last 2 or 3 years like never before. The industry had its first IPO last year of Mr. Car Wash, which is the largest conveyor car wash company in the country.
Adding a little sparkle to a bright future. I'm Lisa Mateo. This is Bloomberg on Sirius XM.
It seems that every day, world economies and markets are making history.
The UK economy expanded last year by the most since World War II.
Biggest move on a 2-year going back to 2009.
Events that haven't happened in years.
Inflation running at its highest pace in 4 decades.
This is the debate, and right now markets have weighed in.
Unprecedented times call for unparalleled reporting.
The National Health Service is under growing strain.
We've seen a fair amount of division up on Capitol Hill.
The gloom out there on the equity markets, you can cut a knife through it.
How do I get people back to work continues to be an issue for corporate America.
Find it here.
Supply constraints were worse in Q1 than Q4, which certainly makes you wonder.
Is the reopening story real by the end of this year?
You definitely saw that bid for safety playing in the Asia-Pacific session.
The Fed may pull this off. They may pull off a soft landing.
Clearly, this sell-off is on the back of geopolitical risk.
Bloomberg on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. The news in Washington has a ripple effect on the country and the world.
Inflation was the talk from Wall Street to Washington.
That's why we bring you the top headlines from Capitol Hill every weekday afternoon.
Redhead on the terminal. This is breaking right now.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew.
We bring in the panel now to round out the fastest hour in politics.
Weekday afternoons at 5 Eastern.
Do you duck and cover, or do you try to spin this?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
What a year it has been in the financial markets. There's nowhere to hide, folks. You can't hide in fixed income. Equities are, down near bear market area here. It's been very, very tough. And this past week has put another, it's been another volatile week in the past week. We had a lot of retailers report numbers, and the margin concern became an issue with all this inflation out there, which is a topic that we heard from our next guest often. Gina Martin-Adams, she's Bloomberg Intelligence equity analyst. Gina, thanks so much for joining us here. We saw the retailers report this past week. A lot of concerns that the inflation-induced pressures are really pressuring margins, and that's a topic you've called out for a long time. Talk to us about what you saw in those retailers' earnings.
Yeah, it wasn't pretty, to say the least, Paul. It really amplifies the trend that's been in the place in the market for several quarters now.